Alright guys, currently reporting from the old familiar Hustler parking lot. Today we're gonna go over 2 of the craziest poker sessions I've ever played.
We must pay homage to him.
And like I said, we're gonna cover 2 of the craziest sessions I've ever played. One was from last Friday, so what is that, 8 days ago now. The second from last night. Both of these Fridays were probably the most action games I've seen on Hustler Casino Live, and I was fortunate enough to be in those games. So without any further ado, let's go over the previous Friday, and then we'll move on to last night's shenanigans. All right, everyone, here we are playing 100, 200, no limit. Quite the big game, at least for myself. I sit down with $100,000, and we're gonna start the night off with a very, very good hand, pocket kings in the small blind. In this hand, there's a raise to 500 before Wesley makes it 1,500 on the button. I'll definitely be putting in a raise of my own with cards this good, so I make it 6,000 to go. Action gets back to Henry now, who's the original raiser, and he decides that he's going to pump it up one more time with ace-jack suited, perhaps thinking that Wesley and myself are a little bit light, but unfortunately for him, I am not light at all. Like I said, I've got one of the best hands in poker, so when he makes it 16,000 and it gets back to me, I think the better play is to just call, keep all his bluffs intact, and let him fire away across multiple streets. But from my experience with Henry, he doesn't really go too crazy once he misses a flop, so I decide to just get it all in there right now. If he's got a hand like ace-king or a smaller pocket pair, I don't expect him to fold, and he's already put in like almost a third of his stack. Turns out this wasn't the best play because Henry does in fact almost fold ace-jack suited, but he does end up making the call luckily. We run it twice and end up holding both times, and we're going to win a $122,000 pot to start the night. In this next one, the $400 straddle is on. Action starts with me on the button with ace-5 suited. I make it 1,000 to go, and then Bobo from the big blind raises to 4,200. Action's back on me now, and with a hand like ace-5 suited, getting re-raised by the big blind after opening from the button, I think we have a great candidate to raise yet again with. This hand has good playability post-flop, and it allows me to disguise the times I raise with aces and kings. So I make it $12,000 to go. Bobo thinks for a bit and makes the call with his 9-5 suited. Optimistic to say the least, but anyway, we're off to a flop which comes king, king, 9, 1 diamond out there. Generally a better board for me than him, so when he checks, I bet small, $6,000. Bobo makes the call and we see the 5 of clubs on the turn, giving us a pair at least, so now we're beating hands like ace-queen or ace-jack that might have called pre-flop and called on the flop against a small size. When he checks, I decide to check it back, and we see the 4 of clubs on the river. Bobo now decides to lead out for $8,000, very small compared to the size of the pot. So with a bluff catcher, I decide to make the call right away. We're beating hands like missed straight draws and such. Bobo, however, has himself a better 2 pair with 9-5 suited. In fact, he's got 3 pair, so that's definitely better than 2 pair. Nice hand, Bobo. Literally the next shuffle, we decide to keep the 400 on, so we are now playing 100, 200, 400. I look down at pocket jacks, I make it 1,000 to go. Bobo calls on the button and Andy defends from the $400 straddle. 3 ways to a flop, which comes 7-6 deuce with 2 hearts. Not exactly the best board for me against 2 opponents, so I decide to pot control with my overpair. Also makes it so that when I check hands that completely miss, it's not as face up, if you will. Action's on Bobo now, he bets 2,000. Andy folds and I of course make the call. Could even raise sometimes I think, but this time I proceed with just a call. We're off to a turn. 4 of diamonds, not exactly the best card in the deck. It introduces some 2-pair combinations that beat me. Also a hand like 8-5 suited now makes a straight. I check again, and now Bobo bets $8,000, right around a pot-sized bet. This is definitely getting a little bit scary, but I still have an overpair, and we're beating plenty of hands that he could be bluffing with. He might even be value betting a worse hand like pocket eights, for example. So again, I make the call.
Ours poker, but I already buy the West poker. I think we buy.
Oh no.
Ours poker? Yeah.
Where are these cards falling from? Bobo, top 2, check mark. Time for some value.
And we don't get a great river card. It's the ace of spades. So now if he was stabbing with random ace high hands, of course we lose to those, as well as the nut flush draw, which could certainly be a possibility as well. So for a third time, I check it over to Bobo. And for a third time, Bobo wants to put chips in the pot. This time quite big, $30,000, which is over the size of the pot. And now we've got a tough decision to make. I think about it for a while. We're still beating hands like missed straight draws or missed flush draws, but of course losing to sets, 2 pair, and even an ace that might go for value in hopes of looking like a bluff, which I do think Bobo is capable of. So after a minute or two, I realized that I probably have to let this one go. I now have one of the worst hands I could possibly have in this situation, especially with the Jack of Hearts, which has some removal to hands he might stab with, like Jack X of Hearts. So yeah, not the most fun spot, but I do end up letting it go, and luckily I get to find out later that my opponent rivered 2 pair. So we save some money on the river. Once again, this one is going to Bobo. Guess who we're going to be battling with this next hand? Yep, the man himself, Bobo. I raise it to 1,000 this time with ace-10 offsuit, get called by Bobo and Nick airball in the small blind. 3 ways to a flop, which comes 10-9-4 rainbow. That gives me top pair, top kicker, usually going to be a good thing. So when it checks to me, I bet $1,000. This isn't really a board I'm concerned about pot controlling on, so happy to just start blasting away. Bobo apparently is too, because he raises again, this time $4,000. Nick airball calls the $4,000, and now it's back on me. And I think we're in one of those very, very rare situations where re-raising yet again on the flop has some merit. Nick cold calling this raise definitely incentivizes me to do that. He could have hands like Queen Jack for an open ender and 2 overs. He could have a weaker 10. He could have all sorts of stuff that has equity against my hand, but I don't really want to let him see a turn card for free. I imagine if he had a set or something better than my hand, he would have raised Bobo himself. So not too worried about what he has. As for Bobo, he could certainly have a set or perhaps 2 pair, but as I have a 10, I think it's more likely he's weighted towards some sort of draw or bluff, which of course we can get value from. Like I said, Queen Jack is a possibility. He could also have 8-7 or Jack 8 suited, for example. So anyway, all that in mind, I decide to put in another raise of my own. 10,000 on top, make it 14K to go. Gets back to Bobo now. He calls another $10,000. Nick airball thinks for a second and gets out of the way. Turn card is the deuce of hearts. Looks pretty good to me. I decide to continue betting, this time $20,000. Bobo, once again, he's got a decision to make with his open-ended straight draw. Looks like he might want to raise, then it looks like he wants to fold. In the end, he decides to call. That's good for me. We're off to a river, which is good news, I think. It's the 10 of spades. Now, of course, my hand improves, but honestly, I don't think it really makes too much of a difference because we were probably either way ahead or way behind. And of course, we're still getting crushed by hands like pocket 9s or pocket 4s, which are, I guess, some concern, but most likely not up against those. Now, of course, I've got 3 of a kind. It's a no-brainer to bet, right? Well, I kind of disagree because like I said all along, I think he's got a draw and there's really no value betting now because no draw has completed. So instead, I decide to check it. I think there's more value in trying to let him bluff with any sort of missed draw. Perhaps he puts me on an overpair and decides to use this 10 as a scare card. But Bobo is too smart for that. After a minute or two, he decides to check it back. Don't really blame him as I only had $50,000 remaining in my stack. Maybe he thought I wouldn't fold for that price, and he was right because I turn over 3 of a kind, ace kicker. That's going to take this one down, and we finally win a pot against Bobo. In the next one, we see a raise from Andy to $1,200. Wesley's next to act, and he decides that's not enough. I have Queen 5 suited. I must raise. He makes it $5,000 to go. Then it's on me with pocket jacks yet again. Same suits, I believe, on the button. Should be ahead of both of these guys more often than not. So I decide to raise myself. I make it $13,000 to go. And now action gets back to Andy, who says that's not enough either and kicks it up to $37,200.
5 bet, ace king suited. Those jacks shrivel up quickly. There's been so much pre-flop aggression. It's going to be hard for Mariano to just relinquish jacks.
Now this is ridiculously strong. There's an open, a raise, and then another raise from a player like myself who has been playing mostly straightforward on this particular night. So I don't think Andy's going to be messing around at all. I suspect we're up against either a bigger pocket pair or ace-king suited. Against all those hands, we're not in great shape. And do I really want to put in like a third or a quarter of my stack, whatever it is? Well, I think the answer is yes. I should be calling more often than not. And I think folding is also okay, especially considering that this is Andy's first 5-bet of the entire day. In fact, it might be the first 5-bet I've ever seen Andy make in a game with me, but I know he's capable of bluffing. This time I don't think he's bluffing. I decide to make a tight fold. And unfortunately, I was up against ace-king suited, which technically is a flip. But like I said, I thought we could be up against some bigger pocket pairs. They say tight is right. Not this time. Not at all. I was way wrong. Nice hand, Andy. Looks like ace-king of clubs worked out for Andy, so in this next hand, I decide to play those cards myself. Action folds all the way to me in the big blind, and I decide to limp in to Pepe's straddle. Pepe's got a hand that he likes, so he makes it $1,400 to go. Now it's time to put in the raise. I make it $6,400 after limping into the straddle. Typically, my strategy in these games is to just limp all my hands from the second to last blind, and then either fold, call, or raise depending on what my opponent does. This time I've got an amazing hand, so it's going to be a raise. $6,400 to go. Pepe calls, and we see a good flop. King, Jack, 4. That gives me top pair, top kicker, but there are plenty of worse hands to get value from, so I continue betting. $4,000 into the pot. Pepe makes the call with his second pair. Turn card is the 8 of clubs, and nothing's really changed from the flop. I still have a hand I think I could get some value with. So this time I bet the size of the pot, $21,000. Would also be doing this with hands like small suited aces or ace queen, maybe ace 10 suited. Pepe, however, does not think I have any of that, so he lets go of his jack 10 suited right away. Not the biggest pot ever, but still nice to take down around $10,000 in profit with this hand. That was the last fun one of this particular stream. Went okay for me, but stay tuned for the next stream, which was way off the rails. Right, so as you saw, that went pretty well for myself. Nothing too crazy in the end. But yeah, it's obvious that I played a little bit tighter than normal, but I think that's understandable because that was a huge game for me. I never sell action. I always have 100% of myself in these games. So I hope you guys can, have a little understanding about me not playing super crazy in these games as opposed to how I might in a 5-10 game or a 25-50 game for that matter. But yeah, in the end, it ended up going okay for me. If that was crazy though, man, last night's session was just insane. Let's go over some of last night's hands and you guys can share your opinions down in the comments. Let's go. All right, here we are back again, playing 100, 200. The 400 is not officially on just yet tonight. Here we go. We start off the night with Bobo opening to $1,000 with the straddle being on in this hand. Action gets to me on the button. I've got King 10 suited, worthy of a raise, I think, so I make it $3,000. And when it gets back to Bobo, he decides that's not enough. Makes it $11,000 to go. I started the hand with around maybe 110,000. And I think you can go a few different ways here. Folding seems okay. Actually, King 10's not the most playable hand ever. Calling also seems decent. We're in position with a suited Broadway, and we're relatively deep. However, raising, I think, also has some merit. We have some removal to strong hands, and getting re-raised again wouldn't be the end of the world since, King 10 suited, as mentioned, is not the best hand ever. Throwing it in the muck isn't going to be too heartbreaking. This time I decide to go for the aggressive route. The reason why is I've watched last Friday's stream at this point, done a little bit of homework, and I know Bobo is happy to get out of line pre-flop. So I think raising a little bit wider than normal against him pre-flop has a bit more merit than it might against some of these other guys. Turns out I'm dead wrong because Bobo's got himself pocket queens. I think the best play for him at this point is to just call, but going all in doesn't seem terrible either, and that's what he does. I, of course, release right away, and we start off the night burning $25,000 when I definitely didn't need to. The good thing about that, however, is that now everyone knows I'm capable of torching money. And that can help when you make hands. So let's try to do that with pocket twos. This time the $800 straddle is on. So I open the action to 2,000, get called by Charles and Bobo. 3 ways to a flop, which comes down exactly what I was looking for. It's ace 4 deuce. Having bottom set on a draw heavy board with an ace out there, that's the stuff dreams are made of, especially against opponents who are not scared of facing some action. So when it gets to me, I bet $2,000, and Charles has himself ace queen. He check raises to 6,000. I think that's totally fair, but sadly for him, I've actually got it this time. So I make the call. Turn card is the 8 of spades, and now Charles bets 8,000. I think at this point we should just raise. I have a strong hand, and he could have draws that probably aren't going to fold. He could have top pair, maybe even a hand like ace 4 or ace 8 that of course is going nowhere at this point. So time to get some value. I make it $28,000 to go. Just your casual $20,000 raise. Charles makes the call, which I'm happy to see. So looking for a clean river card to continue getting value on. Unfortunately, we get one of the worst in the deck. It's the 5 of hearts, meaning any 3 is now straight, and of course the obvious flush draw has completed. Part of me is actually expecting Charles to jam all in here, since I do think it's likely he would play a flush draw this way. And of course, he'll probably go all in fear that I'll check it back. But Charles ends up checking. At this point, I think it's most likely he's got an ace. But after thinking it over for a while, I decide to play it cautiously and check it back. Kind of a sketchy board to try to get more value from an ace on. So I don't know. Check it back. Charles has ace queen. I show him the set and we win this one. Perhaps could have gotten a little more on the river. We shall never know. In this next hand, we are once again going to be tangling with Charles. The 400 is on. I open it up to 1,000 on the button with ace jack. Francisco calls in the big blind, and now Charles re-raises to 4,000 in the straddle. Ace jack offsuit has some good removal to ace king, aces, pocket jacks, you know, the good stuff. And Charles, well, let's just say he could be re-raising from the straddle with a bunch of hands that aren't necessarily super strong. Like you guys see here, he's got pocket sevens. So with all that in mind, I decide to continue my pre-flop aggression. It didn't work out against Bobo. That doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to try. So I make it 12,000 to go. Jokes aside, I do think this is a good hand to do it with. And considering that I opened on the button, Charles could be wider than normal. So yeah, there's the sort of more technical, nerdy aspect to it. 12,000 to go. Francisco folds. Charles does not fold. He makes the call, and we go heads up to a flop of 10-9-4 rainbow. Kind of a neutral board. He's going to have all the possible sets. Maybe I won't, but at the same time, I would have overpairs, whereas he really shouldn't. So, you know, like I said, neutral, I think. Probably better for me. Charles checks. I bet $8,000. Small bet, just like I would with all my holdings. And Charles makes the call. At this point, I think it's likely we're up against a hand like a single pair type holding, maybe Jack 10 suited, perhaps Ace 9 suited, maybe even Ace King that isn't done with it just yet. So I plan on continuing to apply pressure on good turn cards, and the 4 of diamonds definitely qualifies. If I had a hand like pocket 10s, pocket 9s, any overpair, even hands like Ace 10 suited or perhaps King 10 suited, I would continue to bet for value. So I decided to do the same here. The only thing is Charles only has 54,000 behind, so I don't want to bet too big and make it so I have no fold equity on the river, if you will. So I decided to bet 15,000, small bet again, right around a third pot, and jam all in on good river cards. Charles comes along for the ride, which is not ideal. I was hoping at this point he would fold hands like better ace highs or single pair holdings, but Charles is not known to make conservative folds, so it might come down to the river. Maybe I'll even get lucky and hit an ace or a jack. But that's not the case. It's the 9 of spades. This is not a great card. Charles is more likely to have a 9 than I would, but at the same time, I suspect he probably would have folded a 9 on the turn, given all my pre-flop aggression and the fact that I bet flop and turn. So yeah, kind of a close spot now for me. He checks it again, and do we want to give up? Giving up on this river card I don't think would be terrible, but at the same time, if I had an overpair or even ace 10 suited, of course a full house, I would definitely be going all in. And I do think it's a decent candidate for bluffing. We don't have any removal to pocket 8s, pocket 7s, pocket 6s, which I do think are likely hands he would play this way. And we do have removal to ace 10 suited, jack 10 suited, you know, hands that I don't expect him to fold. So yeah, probably not the best bluff candidate in the world, but probably a decent enough one. So Charles checks. I I'm not going to check. I'm going to go for it. I'm all in for around $40,000. We don't get snap called, which is always good news. And Charles does not seem happy with the situation. He knows I could have an overpair. He knows I could have a full house. He knows I could just be going for value with a 10. But it seems that he also knows he's getting a good price. He's got a decent bluff catcher. And he's seen me burn some money before. So he knows that I could probably have a hand like I do in this situation. He thinks it over for a minute. A couple of minutes go by. At this point, I start to get the feeling he is not going to fold. But yeah, he doesn't fold. He makes the call. I announce ace high. Charles shows the pocket sevens. And we are going to be losing a $150,000 pot to Charles after he makes a really nice call. Nice hand, Charles. In this one, Charles raises to 600. Bobo calls on the button, and I'm in the small blind with 10-9 suited. Not really a fan of calling in the small blind, so I think this hand should probably get folded most of the time and occasionally re-raised with. This time, you guys can probably guess what I do. I make it 3,600 to go. Gets back to Charles. He makes the call. Bobo gets out of the way. So we're going to go heads up to a flop, which is ace 7-6 rainbow with 1 diamond. So we've got a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw. There's also an ace out there, which I could represent given that I re-raised pre-flop. So all these are reasons for continuing to bet. I put in $4,000. Charles has an open-ended straight draw. He is going nowhere. As you guys can see from the board, the dream turn card would be an 8. And what do you know? That's exactly what comes.
Oh my. So we had open-ended versus a gut shot, and the perfect card in the entire deck comes up.
That's right, the 8 of spades, giving Charles the straight and flush draw and giving me the nuts. That is the best possible hand on this board. Now, technically speaking, I think my hand should just get checked almost always. This is a turn card that's much better for him than me, and there's probably more value in letting him bluff at it, but in this exact situation, I think the better option is to just ignore all that and think to myself, I have a good hand. I'm going to put chips in the pot. Plus, how bad could it really be to bet the nuts, right? So I put in $8,500, right around half pot, hoping Charles has something to continue with, and he sure does. And not just with a call, but a raise to $31,000. Music to my ears, of course. Now we have a question between jamming all in or just calling. And yet again, I think the better option is not what I ended up doing. I think calling makes more sense. It allows us to keep his bluffs intact and value bet worse on the river. But in the moment, I was just thinking, I haven't really seen Charles get too crazy with raises post-flop unless he's got something good. And after he makes it 31K, that's a considerable amount of his stack. He's probably got something that he's not going to fold. So I announce all in. Sure enough, Charles has himself a straight. He is going nowhere. He's also got this flush draw going. Technically a straight flush draw, if you will, so that's insurance for him. He makes the call. We decide to run it twice. Pot is $232,000. Looking to avoid any spades on the river. First card is the 3 of diamonds. Second card, 5 of diamonds. That gives us the best hand on both boards. And despite being off to a rough start, we win $116,000 in this hand. All right, guys, here we go. This is the hand of the night. In this one, I open the action from first position with King 10 suited diamond variety. Charles re-raises on the button to $2,000, and then Andy cold calls in the big blind. Action's back on me, and as mentioned previously in this vlog, King 10 suited is a good candidate to re-raise again with pre-flop, especially so when someone cold calls out of the blinds. There's just extra dead money to pick up, so I make it $9,000 to go. Charles calls with 8-7 suited, and when it gets back to Andy in the big blind, he's got a suited ace. He's going nowhere just yet. 3 ways to a flop. I've got King 10 of diamonds, and the flop comes out Queen, Jack, 9, all diamonds.
You gotta be kidding me. We've got a straight flush against the nut flush.
That's right. In case you missed it, I have a straight flush on the flop, and Andy flops the nut flush. To say that this is a cooler wouldn't be doing it justice. This is just one of those hands that you probably only play once in a lifetime. you hardly even witness, honestly. I don't think I've ever seen something like this. I can't really believe it. But of course, in the moment, I don't have any knowledge of Andy's hand, so just hoping someone has something. Andy checks the flop. I try to keep my wits about me and think, how would I play all my hands? And really, this is kind of a bad board for me, having re-raised a bunch of times pre-flop. Generally, it's going to be better for my opponents than me, so I decide to check it. Charles checks it back, and we see a blank on the turn to 3 of hearts. Andy checks again, and now I decide to bet small. This is how I would play hands like ace-queen, aces, kings, maybe even a set once in a while. So 8,000 into the pot. Charles releases his 8-7 of hearts. Andy does not release. In fact, he springs the trap, or rather what he thinks is the trap, raising it up to $35,000. At this point, I start to realize what must be going on. Andy's got himself a good hand, perhaps a set or the nut flush, fingers crossed. And yeah, this is the stuff dreams are made of course. Flopping a straight flush and getting check raised to $35,000 by an opponent who's got quite a lot of chips. I think the best play here is to just call, leave all options open on the river, so that's what I do. And we see the 6 of diamonds on the river. Pot is now about $100,000. And it looks like Andy is not done betting. He's assembling a bet. Looks like it's going to be a big one. And sure enough, he puts in $120,000. I have the stone cold nuts with king 10 of diamonds. Can't even believe my luck at this point. Of course, nothing to do but jam all in and hope that he's not bluffing. So that's what I do. And it looks like he's not, because after thinking it over for just a couple of seconds, he makes the call and shows the nut flush. I turn it over, and just like that, we are going to be winning a $611,000 pot against a legendary Los Angeles player, Andy. He takes it like an absolute gentleman, I gotta say, and I am just in shock about what just went down. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was in this exact same seat, holding aces versus 2 opponents who had pocket kings. Now this goes down. It's unreal, the amount of luck involved. But hey, that's part of the game, and I'm just very appreciative and happy to be on the right end of it. So yeah, needless to say, the session is going much better now. We are up around $300,000. All right, moving on. If you guys are fans of pots that are over $500,000, here's a couple more. In this one, I open it up with pocket 8s, get re-raised by Charles yet again on the button. 2 people call, and like I said in the last hand, when there's dead money, I think re-raising has merit almost always. But with pocket 8s, I think I'm happy to play multi-way. You know, I'm either going to flop a set or I'm not. So I decided to just call, though I think re-raising is also okay. Thank goodness I didn't this time, because Charles actually had me beat. I make the call. We go 4 ways to a magical flop. King, Jack, 8, 2 diamonds. We've got bottom set on a draw-heavy board for the second time tonight. Again, this is run good at its finest. Interestingly enough, Bobo decides to lead out when the action gets to him. Makes it $8,000, leading into the pre-flop raiser, who is Charles in this case. Now it's on me with 8s, and we have a decision between calling or raising right away. And I think both are okay, but considering that it's 4 ways, no one's going to be messing around too much, so I decide to just raise it up. I make it $20,000 to go. Charles gets out of the way, Andy does as well, but Bobo has himself bottom pair and a flush draw, so he's probably not going to fold. But what I didn't expect is for him to put in another raise of his own. He makes it $60,000 to go. I'm not really sure about this raise. I don't know like what he's trying to accomplish, if he's bluffing or he's trying to get me to fold a worse flush draw. I don't actually know what the deal is, but I have a set, so that's all I really know. I have set, I put chips in. Yeah, pretty advanced stuff, huh? Yeah, now the question is, do I want to call in position or do I want to raise? He's got $186,000 behind, so I think the very clear answer is to just call. We're in position. We're likely to keep all his bluffs open this way, and if we jam all in, he might even fold hands like 2 pair, perhaps. Probably not. What am I even saying? But all that said, Bobo, as far as I know, does not like to put in $60,000 and then fold. It's just not something I've ever seen him do after playing with him 3 or 4 times. So I do something completely unorthodox and jam all in on the flop. The second I do it, I kind of hate it, if I'm being honest with you guys. This was just a little bit too much adrenaline going to my head. I feel like doing this is the only way to let him off the hook with hands like the nut flush draw or 10-9 of spades. You know, these sort of like combo draws that we're getting a little feisty but now don't want to call. Even a hand like the one he's got, 9-8 of diamonds, I expect him to fold that at this point. He has to call all his chips off with bottom pair and a not very good flush draw. But that's exactly what he does. He makes the call. So yeah, even though my play wasn't great, we end up getting the best possible result. We are all in on the flop for over $500,000 in the middle, and we are 70% to win this one. Pretty big pot though, so I ask him to run it twice. He says no problem. First turn card is a blank. However, the first river is the 3 of diamonds, giving my opponent a flush. That is unfortunate. We are now quite nervous about this second board, but luckily he does not make a flush on that one, and we end up chopping it. So yeah, we profit around $3,000 in this hand, but could have been a lot better. Again, though, it's hard to complain after flopping a straight flush versus the nut flush. So I'll just shut up and move to the last hand. Now, you remember how I just mentioned that a few weeks ago I was sitting in the same seat and I got all in pre-flop with pocket aces 3 ways for a massive pot? Well, that's exactly what's going to happen here. Now, I'll kind of spare you guys the details because all that's really going on is a cooler versus ace king. And my man Brad over here, an absolute legend, gambling it up with 6-5 suited. There's a bunch of raising going on pre-flop. I have pocket aces, and I can't believe my luck when Bobo makes it $25,000 to go. It's not rocket science. I'm going to keep raising since both my cards have the letter A on them. Make it $60,000 to go. Brad decides that's a decent price for 6-5 suited. I'm in there. And now Bobo announces all in for 200 and something thousand, around $250,000. Of course, I am going nowhere. I have aces. I call. Brad decides, I put in 60,000. What's another 100 and something K? I'm in there as well. Yeah, 3 of us are all in. Pot is $620,000. I have pocket aces. One of the guys has ace king. The other has 6-5 suited. We are 66% to win this one. Decide to run this one twice, and you won't believe it, or you probably will if you've already seen this, but Brad makes a straight on the first run, and then he flops trips on the second run. I mean, you got to give the man credit. He put in all his chips pre-flop, and they were a lot of chips. With 6 high, he deserves all the money, I think. I ran bad in this spot, but I've been sun running in bigger pots for like a month now, so I guess it's fair in the end. Plus, I didn't even lose that much in this one because even though I lost both times to Brad, I did win both of the runs against Bobo, who had more than Brad in his stack. So we win the side pot. When the math is all said and done, I ended up losing like $30,000 or $40,000 in this one. So after getting aces cracked twice in a 600K pot, I'd call that a decent result. Anyway, that was the last noteworthy one of this madness. Like I always say, I hope you guys enjoyed the hands. Okay, so as you guys saw, I think it's fair to say that was easily the wildest session I've ever had. And I think it even tops the aces versus kings night. Perhaps debatable, but overall, I think it was just a wilder night. Luckily for me, after that straight flush over nut flush hand, the straight versus straight, and despite running kind of bad with the pocket aces all in pre-flop, I ended up booking one of my biggest wins of all time. I won $330,000 in around 5 or 6 hours, in addition to winning around $40,000 the previous Friday. So that is a nearly 400K uptick across the last 8 days. To say that things are going well would be an understatement. And I'm back here today, Saturday, to play my private game, which is 5100 no limit, usually every Saturday, sometimes on Sundays. If you guys are interested in that, by the way, shoot me a message on Instagram. We have a fun group here every weekend, and we take new members once in a while. So get in touch with me on there if you're interested in playing. As always, thank you guys for all the support. It's kind of wild to think that like maybe a year or two ago, I was standing in the same parking lot talking about how I'm gonna play my first ever stream which I believe was 510 no limit here at Hustler Casino Live, maybe 510-20. Don't quote me on that, but to say things have gone well isn't doing it justice. You know, I'm really happy with how things have been going. And cheers to more crazy nights like these across the next year or few years. We'll see where life takes us. But yeah, thank you guys for watching as always. Appreciate the support, and until next time, good luck at the tables. I'm gonna get in there and go play some cards. Later.